Hey, you're listening to The Treehouse Storyteller. Meet me in the treehouse for God-shaped storytelling. Treehouse Storyteller is where we can come together as messy parents seeking Jesus together and raising kids to love him too. If you aren't scared of addressing cultural issues head on and finding a deeper understanding of the biblical worldview to share with your children, then you've come to the right place. I'm not afraid to be transparent and tell all of the juicy details. Our children are being chased by the world, and it is our job to be well equipped and know not only how to lead our flock, but successfully send our arrows out into the world one day to build the kingdom. So snuggle up by the fire or soak up the sunshine with those earbuds in and meet me in the treehouse for some biblical storytelling. Hey guys, welcome back to the Treehouse. Today I have an amazing guest with me. Her name is Elizabeth Urbanowicz, and she just is a wealth of knowledge. I'm so excited to have this interview. We had to put it off because we had fires around my house and we had to reschedule it. And it's finally happening today, and we get to hear from her and see the work that she's doing for our little kids and the next kingdom that is being built. So without further ado, welcome to the Treehouse, Elizabeth.
Well, thanks so much for having me on today, Hannah. I have loved treehouses since I was a kid, so I'm really excited to be with you today.
Oh, that is awesome. That's awesome. Well, I want to dive into knowing more about you because I've done my homework and I know about your curriculum, but I don't know as much about you. So for our listeners and for myself included, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story.
Yes. So my background is in elementary education, as I'm sure some of your listeners also have that same background. And I spent the first decade of my professional career as a teacher in a Christian school. And I taught fourth grade and then third grade. And God has just designed me to love kids and love getting to work with kids. And I loved what God had called me to in the classroom. But several years into my teaching experience, I noticed a problem that most of the children that were in my classroom, they came from homes where their parents were intentional discipling them. I was their teacher. I was giving them a biblically based education all day long. Most of them were involved in a local church, and they knew all of the Bible stories. They knew all the Bible verses. But when it came to carefully evaluating just the hundreds and thousands of ideas that they were confronted with each and every week and month and year, they were really unprepared for filtering those ideas through a critical and biblical lens. And so I started looking for resources that could just help me teach my little third graders some basic skills, how to pause and ask good questions and evaluate whether or not what they were hearing was lining up with the biblical worldview. And everything that I found, all of the resources that I found were for high school on up. And I was so grateful that those resources exist. I know that I think it was season 2 of your podcast, you had Dr. Jeff Myers on, and Summit Ministries. It's a great resource for high school students and college students. And I'm so grateful that resources and ministries like that exist. But I thought, man, if these little third graders in my class are showing these issues now, and we wait until they're 16, 17, 18 years old before we begin equipping them, we have lost so much time. And so I thought, okay, if these resources don't exist, I guess I better get reading and starting to attend seminars. And so I did that. And then I just created an after-school class for third, fourth, and fifth graders at my school, just teaching them the basics of a biblical worldview and the basics of other worldviews and having them compare and contrast the two. Now, I did that part, but the rest was completely my students. It was amazing to see what these, third, fourth, fifth graders, like 8, 9, 10-year-olds did with the information that moms started calling me and saying, well, my son wants to pause family movie night and evaluate the character's worldview. This is great, but I'm going to need a little help because I don't know how to do this. And teachers were coming down to my classroom from fourth and fifth grade saying, how are you getting these kids to think so deeply about mathematics and science and social studies? And I was like, I kind of don't know. I'm just teaching them some basic skills. So it was so exciting to see what God was doing just with the information that had been given them, how they were really taking it and running with it. And after people started seeing the change and the transformation in these students, I started getting calls from all over the country saying, hey, how can we get our hands on the resources that you have? And I was like, I'm sorry, like I'm a third grade teacher. I am not a Christian publishing house. Like I don't have anything to help you. Just go out, read some books, take some classes. I'm sure you'll be fine. But everyone was like, no, just let us know when this is published. So eventually, a few years into receiving those requests continuously, I went back to school to get a master's degree in Christian apologetics just to make sure that I really knew what I was talking about. And then in the middle of that degree, I stepped back from the classroom and started Foundation Worldview, which is a ministry that's designed to help Christian parents and educators and church leaders equip the children in their care to think critically and biblically and evaluate every idea that comes their way. And so, as I mentioned, as you and I were chatting before, Hannah, I'm single, I'm not married, I don't have children of my own. So I'm not, I'm not in the day in, day out as a parent, which I know most of your listeners are. And that is such a vital job. But my role in the body of Christ, since I don't have that day in, day out stress and pressure, is to help create resources that can then help support parents as they're in the daily grind of trying to faithfully disciple their children.
I love that. I love that so much. I love that you know your place in the body. That's such an important piece that you just mentioned there that I could go a whole other different podcast. I love it. Can you tell us a little bit? So what actually is this curriculum made up of? Like what all, kind of give us the layout of the land of what we could expect looking at this curriculum.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, primarily at Foundation Worldview, we produce curriculum, and we currently have 6 different curriculums out there. And if anybody who is listening and is not homeschooling their kids, the word curriculum might seem like, whoa, that seems so intense and intimidating. But what we mean by curriculum is simply, here's some lessons that you can do with your kids. And so all of our curriculum are video based. They have a video that you watch with your child. They have some activity sheets that you print off and work on together. And so we have curriculums for kids that are ages 4 through 8, curriculums that are for kids ages 8 through 12, and then curriculums for kids ages 10 to 14. And they are focused on worldview development, biblical literacy, and biblical sexuality. So that's the main arm of our ministry here at Foundation Worldview.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I want to dive into the one that's titled God's Good Design, New Biblical Sexuality Curriculum for Ages 4+. Now, a lot of people might scratch their head, not me, but there are probably a lot of people that are going 4+. This is kind of crazy. But guys, we actually do homeschool. But little fun fact, kids are taught stuff as early as some maybe preschool, but as definitely as early as kindergarten and first grade in your public school. They're taught a lot about sexuality, more so than I would care to admit or even understand. It boggles my mind. Stuff that we were never taught at that age in our generation as parents. So why age 4? Let's dive into this. And what does this curriculum offer our kids?
Yes, I know for most people, when you start talking to your kids about God's good design for sexuality at age 4, there's like this gasp, like, oh my goodness, you've got to be kidding me. But as you mentioned, our children are going to be exposed to things in the world, even if they're not directly taught things. No matter where we live, our children are going to encounter, 2 men who believe they're married to one another, walking down the street together. Our kids are going to encounter things that we're going to have to answer and explain. And so the reason at Foundation Worldview that we recommend starting to have these conversations around the age of 4 is really for 2 main reasons. The first one is we want our children to come to us with their questions, concerns, and confusion over anything related to sexuality. And I don't know what it is. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know if there's like a name, like some term for this. But whoever introduces us to a concept first is the person who we view as the expert on that topic. Like I think about my 5th grade teacher. She was very passionate about space exploration. And so she was the first one to teach me about, famous astronauts and, the John Glenn orbiting the Earth, and then the different Apollo missions to the moon. Now, in my mind, I always view that teacher, I view Miss Woodruff as the expert on space exploration. She is not the expert. She was a 5th grade teacher. There are much better resources that I could go to for information. But in my mind, she subconsciously is the expert on that topic because she was the first one to introduce me to it. And the same thing happens to our children in all areas of life. But we particularly want to make sure that we are the first ones to introduce them to sexuality because we want to help them understand what God's good design is for this area of life. And if we want them to come to us with these questions, concerns, confusions, anything like that, we have to make sure that we have the first conversation so that in their minds, we are the expert that they should go to. So that's the first reason why having these conversations early is so important. The second reason that it's so important is we want to make sure that our children have a positive view of sexuality. I know just from talking with friends and others that when they were growing up and the message was just like, don't have sex, don't have sex, don't have sex, don't have sex, that then they got married and they were kind of like, oh, this, like, what is this kind of like dirty thing, where that's not the biblical view. And I know from a lot of friends really had to like retrain their minds to understand that sex is good within the context of marriage. And we want to make sure that our children from an early age understand the inherent goodness of our bodies being gendered as either male or female, the inherent goodness of sex as the seal of the marriage covenant, as the way that children are brought forth, as the way intimacy is created between a husband and a wife. We want them to see the inherent goodness of all these things. And if we wait to have these conversations until our child is exposed, on PBS on Arthur to Mr. Ratburn marrying a man, or to the Pride Parade on Blue's Clues, or if we wait, until the couple that moves in next door is two mommies with a daughter, if we wait to have these conversations until our kids are exposed to some kind of corruption of God's good design, their view of gender and sexuality is very naturally going to be negative because that was their first exposure to the topic. Where before we encounter any of these things, we want to have these conversations that show our kids this is a good thing. This is what God's good design is. So for those two reasons, I say it is so important that we have these conversations early. As an added bonus, this is not a reason why to have the conversation, but it is a big added bonus. When you start talking with your child about topics related to gender and sexuality when they're 4, 5, 6 years old, there's only one person in the conversation who feels awkward. And that is you. Because our little ones, they don't have any awkwardness around this topic, where if we wait until our children are like 9, 10, 11, and their bodies are already starting to change and they're not exactly sure what's going on and their hormones are changing and their emotions are raging, all of these things, start having the first conversation then, while it's not impossible, it's going to be a lot more uncomfortable for our children. So if we can start this conversation early, our children are not going to be uncomfortable.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, we see in Genesis, I say all the time, and in multiple of my own writings, if we don't believe Genesis 1 first, the rest is bogus. I mean, we've got to believe Genesis 1 first. He created male and female. And then, everyone's like, oh, that's Old Testament. So much has changed. Oh, well, flash forward to Matthew. Matthew reiterates it. We know God, it's thousands of years later, he created the male and female. And, over and over in the Bible just completely lays that foundation of truth for us. And, that's something I have a 14-year-old, now he's 14. I have an 11-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old daughter. And honestly, the journey's changed over the years. And the things that I said to my son maybe when he was 5 is maybe a little different. But man, I talk to them kind of like they're all the same age. And it's just, it's just like, here's my classroom. You guys are all in different maturity levels, and I go into depth differently with the three of them. Those single personal conversations are different. But maybe what would be super helpful, maybe walk us through a lesson of this concept. Since I have a 5-year-old, I'm picturing myself going through this kind of curriculum with her. My oldest ones have heard it from me for years, different ways, but I would love to see how this curriculum kind of unfolds and maybe walk us through like a typical lesson plan, what that looks like.
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll walk you through the big picture so you can kind of see the progression and then zero in on like a lesson or two. So the curriculum is actually broken up into 3 big units. And this was what took me and the team like the longest time when we were first figuring out just how to cover this concept well. We were like, okay, so we want to cover, gender. We want to cover marriage. We want to cover family. We want to cover these topics. We also want to, prepare them to reject pornography and to protect them from abuse and, give them basic introductions to like homosexuality and transgenderism and why these aren't God's good design. And we were just like reeling with like, what are the big categories here, that our kids need to know? And then over time, as we hashed it out, it became really clear that first we need to cover the concept of design. You were mentioning Genesis 1 before, and Genesis 1 makes clear that we, along with the rest of creation, have been intentionally designed.
Mm-hmm.
And it is that design that then points us to the designer and the goodness of his design. Where if we just got here, randomly, accidentally through millions of years of blind, unguided evolution, well, we don't really have any inherent meaning. We don't really have any inherent value or dignity. So we can create our own futures, but that is not what all the evidence points to. When we look at the complex systems in our body, those systems, each and every one of them is pointing to a designer. So in the first unit, we cover the concept of design, and we just introduce that design is a purposeful plan. And then we have kids look at different objects to tell whether or not they have been designed by looking at the intentionality of the plan. And then we connect it to us. And we just give them some basic facts, about like what our lungs do without us even thinking about it. And our heart, how the heart pumps the blood, which carries the oxygen, to all the different parts of our body. And we say, look at the plan here. What does this plan point to? It's a design. It points to a designer. And so then once we've established that we are designed, then we look in the second unit, we look at God's good design for us as individuals. And in the third unit, we look at God's good design for us in relationship. And so in that first unit that covers us as individuals, the first concept we just look at is that God is good, therefore his design is good, because that's the only kind of thing that God can design because he is good. And then we look at the goodness of God's design, creating us in his image, creating us as male and female, creating us as body and soul. And we look at all of the goodness of these things, but then we also introduce the concept of sin. And we talk about, how sin corrupts God's good design. And then we introduce some of those corruptions. We teach them in one lesson, because of sin, feelings can trick us. Because of sin, not all touch is good touch. Because of sin, not all pictures are good pictures. So we introduce them to these corruptions and then wrap it up by saying, when Jesus returns, God's good design for us will last forever. Then the third unit, we cover God's good design for relationships. So the first lesson, we just cover how God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That means he's relational. He's relational, so he designed us to be relational. And then the next concept we introduce is how God designed different kinds of love for different kinds of relationship. Because one thing we really want to prepare our kids to understand is that when our world, just makes this assumption that all love is sexual, that is a faulty assumption. That God has created friendship love. Yes, he's created marriage love. And he's created family love. Now, those aren't the only kinds of love God's created, but we want our kids to see the difference between those. We talk about the goodness of friendship, then we talk about what marriage is. Biblically, what is marriage? It's one man and one woman becoming one flesh for life. And it's a picture of Jesus and the church. And then we look at the family as well. And then we introduce again some corruptions to God's good design. And we say, because of sin, sometimes we desire the wrong kind of love in relationships. And so we talk about how sometimes, two men or two women might desire to turn what God only designed as friendship love into marriage love. Then we talk about how because of sin, sometimes we reject or ignore God's good design. And there's many ways that we can do that. And then again, we wrap it up with when Jesus returns, God's good design for us and for relationships will last forever. So that's the big picture we want to take our kids through. And the way that it plays out in every lesson is this curriculum is for kids roughly ages 4 through 8. And so, Hannah, you have 3 children. You know that at those ages, they just need to be moving. They need to have their bodies involved in things. So we have them standing up and sitting down and saying things loudly and quietly. And we play games in the videos. Every video is between 15 and 18 minutes long. It's designed for the parent to watch along with the child. And then we have an activity sheet after that has some coloring. It has some scripture memory, has some questions that are asked and answered. So our goal is really to just equip parents with just easy to use language to train their children to understand the inherent goodness of God's design, to understand what corruptions they're going to find both in the world and potentially, even within their own hearts, and then prepare them to think biblically through those things.
That's awesome. I love that so much. You got me so excited, like super, super. That's really, really cool. I love your passion. It's very evident that you've just put a lot of heart behind this. So how can churches help families teach these biblical truths to young kids? I mean, is this a program we can see with churches as well?
Yeah, so we have it's almost similar to like the anti-piracy screen, that you see at the beginning of every movie, at the beginning of every video. We say that we only authorize the use of these videos if parents are present, because really, as an organization, we really believe that sex education has really been hijacked by the public schools, that it was never meant to be something a teacher in a classroom talks about with a child, that it was meant to be done with the parents. So we do have 2 church licenses that are available. Churches can either buy bulk licenses and then sell them at a reduced rate to families and do kind of like a family home discipleship. Like, okay, this week everybody's going through lesson 1, we'll debrief next Sunday or next Wednesday, whenever, but you do it in your home. Or they can buy a classroom license, but they have to agree that parents will be present with their children, that they can teach it, they can watch the video together, but the parent is right there alongside their child. And so it wasn't the best business decision, but I really think it was a good discipleship decision, just to hopefully get churches also thinking outside of the box, because this is a little bit of a tangent, but it is related. That I think, within the local church, over the past around 80 years, we've just had this steady progression of moving to heavy kids and youth programming rather than equipping families to disciple their children. So I'm not saying that all children's pastors and youth pastors should be fired, but I'm saying if we really look at what the biblical model is, discipleship of children should primarily, almost 100% be done in the home, and anything the church does should just be added to support what the parents are doing. So that's the model and the approach we take at Foundation Worldview.
I love that so much. I'm 100% behind that. I think this gives really accountability to the parents. Like, hey, these are your kids. We pawn them off to so many different outlets throughout the week. And, whether it's public school or sports or other activities where they're being guided and led by other adults that aren't the parents. And we see that at church as well. And I know it's an unpopular opinion, because a lot of pastors, a lot of congregates want the sanctuary to be quiet and, a good learning environment without tears and cries and tantrums and coloring sheets, making noise. And I think that is, we've kept our kids in church with us as much as possible over the years, and especially at those really early ages. And I think that's so important, really, really so important.
Yeah, it is. And I think we really need a mindset shift over what church is, because it's interesting, because at Foundation Worldview, in our podcast and in some of our webinars, I am consistently encouraging parents to do exactly what you're talking about, keeping kids in the corporate worship service. And it's so interesting, just the comments that we get of people being vehemently opposed to this on YouTube. And the most common response is, I can't get anything out of the service when my kids are there. And we don't really respond to comments like that. People can share their opinions. That's fine. But what I really want to do is take that person by the hand and take them out to coffee and ask, is the purpose of corporate worship on Sundays to get something out of it? Or is it to worship Jesus? Like, why do we meet corporately? Because since sermons, sometimes are a little bit more like motivational talks, I think we tend to think like, oh, I have to, get something out of this and this motivate me for the week, where it's like, no, like the purpose of this service is to lift my eyes towards Jesus. And it's supposed to do that for kids as well. And our kids aren't supposed to, quote unquote, get something out of it. They're supposed to have their eyes lifted towards Jesus. And so, yeah, So anyway, something, it's kind of a different conversation, but something that's so important.
No, it's great because, I mean, it's things that aren't said very often. I really do believe that, and I'm glad it got brought
Mhm.
up because, I mean, even Jesus himself teaching, he said, you know, "Let the little children come to me," and he brought them
Mhm.
close to them because that was countercultural then. You know, the
Yeah.
women and the children were in the back while the men were up front listening to the message, and he wanted the children to be able to listen to and have a front row seat to what he was
Yeah.
saying, and I think that's incredible, and our kids need to see that, you know, if you're going back to what you said, if they're just trying to get something out of Sunday morning, then what have you been doing Monday through Saturday? I mean, that's where the
Exactly.
in my heart, and if that's the only perception of church or learning about God that our kids are seeing from us, then we're missing the mark because they need to see that we're in the
Mhm.
Word Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday also,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
you know, Sunday is for fellowship and worship, like you said, and accountability and praying over each other and so much more than just feeding time. You know,
Yep.
it's just as much giving time as it is more so than feeding time. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. I'm glad that, you know, the Holy Spirit brings stuff up as he wishes. And so it's good stuff. It's a good reminder and it's hopefully convicting for some of us. Oh my goodness. Okay. So what kind of feedback have you heard? How long has this program been out, first of all?
Yeah, so we released God's Good Design curriculum in the middle of June of 2024. So as you and I are recording this, it's been about 3 months. You know, when this is released, it's going to be a little bit more time. So there hasn't been too much time for people to implement it
Yeah.
and give us feedback yet. But the feedback that we have heard so far has been positive, that parents have said that they're so grateful just for the language that's used because it's modeled in the videos and then it's language that they can use for their children, which sometimes, you know, that's one of the most challenging things about teaching and instructing children. Now, I'm sure for most of the moms and dads listening, you know, you have language that you use with your kids. You just figure it out over time. Like I remember the first time I heard my brother reference like the bathroom as the potty for like his 2-year-old son. I just laughed out loud because I know my brother so well. And I'm like, never in any other situation in this man's life would he ever have used that term. But he, you know, like he loves his son, he knows his son. So he
Right.
used that term. And so we tend to have language in these
Mhm.
situations with our kids. But when it comes to explaining biblical terms or cultural terms, sometimes it's hard when we might not have even thought through the concept really well to think through, oh my goodness, what is language that I can use to talk through this with my child? And so I think that's one of the things that's really most valuable about this program and that we've already received good feedback from is that it helps start these conversations in really developmentally appropriate language and then also just provides further talking points for parents to have with kids. Like some parents have said, you know, now even when they're in the car driving, you know, they're just saying, okay, let's play our designed or not designed game. You know, like let's look for things on the road, you know, like that are designed, things that have not been designed. And it's really hard to find things that have not been designed. But, you know, like if you find like asphalt that has been cracked, you know, like that crack was not purposely placed there, you know, or if you see a mud puddle, you know, that wasn't like purposely placed there. So just
Yeah.
even like simple games that parents can play with kids to just continue building this paradigm in their mind of what design is and how God's design for us is so good.
I love that so much. So my background actually is in interior design and architecture. And so, I mean, this is just like, oh my goodness, I love it. Oh, that's so good. I mean, we live in just such a sideways culture, as I always say. And I'm sure, you know, I've tackled the sexuality topic many times on my podcast and seasons
Mhm.
prior. And, you know, I'm sure there's parents out there listening going, oh my gosh, another episode that she's doing, you know, this kind of topic. And I just want to say boldly that I will not stop addressing this issue and talking about this issue until our culture isn't making it an issue to talk about, you know, and our culture is
Um,
so heavy-handed right now, forcing this stuff down our throats. I was on Instagram for like literally a hot minute this morning, for maybe 30 seconds, just long enough to see someone else had shared a clip from Good Morning America of a young boy being worshiped as, hey, he's the youngest drag queen that we've ever seen. And he was dressed up as a drag queen, a little child, probably like an 8-year-old
Wow.
boy, walking the runway down in this Good Morning America set. And they were just applauding him and making it just such a this is such an exciting thing, and just flaunting it. And oh my goodness, like it just broke my heart, because this is the culture.
Yeah.
These are the lies that our kids are exposed to. And so what you are doing and what you are bringing into the home is so, so valued and so important. And I just am so thankful for your obedience, because clearly your story was not that you weren't sitting here going like, ooh, I'm going to make this giant curriculum that like wows the masses. I mean, you were just being faithful and little and doing what God had in store for you. And you saw person after person like, hey, this is a need. Let's get this. Like we want to purchase this. And so that's awesome. It's so incredible. So anyone listening, I highly recommend that you check this stuff out. Elizabeth, how can my listeners and viewers find you and find this curriculum for themselves?
Yes. So if you can remember the name Foundation Worldview, which I know is a really long name, but I guess my name is Elizabeth Urbanowicz, so I had to have a long company name as well. So if you remember Foundation Worldview, if you go to foundationworldview.com, that's our website where all of our curriculum is housed and all of the rest of just the different resources that we have. And if anybody is interested, any listener is interested in purchasing one of our curriculums, if you use the coupon code Treehouse10, you can get $10 off of any family license.
Yay, that's awesome. All right, you guys heard it from her. Run and use that code. Get your discount. This sounds amazing. I can't wait to dive into this and check it out more and use it in our home. It's just fabulous what you're doing. Elizabeth, I appreciate you so much. I thank you so much for being in the Treehouse with us today. And I look forward to seeing what else God pulls out of your sleeve in years to come, and supporting you further.
Well, thanks so much for having me on today, Hannah. It's really been a joy to be with you in the Treehouse.
Wait, before you go, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and follow us on Facebook or Instagram at The Treehouse Storyteller so we can stay connected. Head on over to thetreehousestoryteller.com for more products, artwork, photography, and encouragement. See you next time.